All right. Good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm very honored to be here to share with this very young audience today what we do in our human research program. I understand I do not have more than 15 minutes, so I will try my very best to condense our activities as much as I can. If you don't hear me anymore, just raise your hands. Now, what do we do? What is our drive? Why is there a need to conduct human research in space? Human spaceflight is currently quite some changes in direction. And that is that we are entering a new phase of space exploration, the next phase of space exploration. We have been and we are utilizing the ISS to the maximum extent possible. Already to take the next step. We would like to go back to the moon. We would like to try to go to Mars with a human crew for an extended period of time. And linked to such ambitious goals, challenges we need to address, and that is what we do with our daily work. Now, it will probably not come as a surprise to you to tell you that this space environment does not really offer conditions for which humans were made for. Space is actually quite a hostile environment for humans when you think about it. Space exposes the astronauts to massive radiation. The crews have to live autonomously in isolation and in a very confined and very confining small tin can. Space exposes astronauts to zero gravity conditions, which has an impact on their bodies, and all those factors have a direct impact on the feasibility and on the success of such long duration exploration missions with a human crew. So if we want to send a human crew to the moon, to Mars, or in general into deep space, we need to ensure fit, functional, and healthy throughout the entire mission, from the very beginning to the bitter end. And to ensure that to a destination in deep space and then of course back safely. And with our human research program, we contribute to that endeavor through all our different research projects. So that means that all the activities that we support through our program center around one question, and that is, how can we make humans a spacefaring species? How can we contribute to make missions beyond low Earth orbit with a human crew a safe reality, and how can we preserve health over the entire astronaut's lifetime? And with our various research platforms, our part of human research portfolio, we address all of those risks and challenges systematically. Those research platforms are both in space but also on ground, and each of them addresses and reproduces or more unique features that are characteristic for the space environment. Each of them provides us with the ability to address certain risks and challenges that space has on us and on the human body, and I will depict just a few of those platforms to show you how our research program and activities all fit together. Now, the most prominent and most innovative research platform that I'm sure you all know is the International Space Station, or ISS. It is the most complex and innovative research platform that mankind has ever made, and we can be very proud to participate to this greatest international project ever. Many international partners work together for decades to complete one of the largest and most ambitious engineering projects. More than 100 space flights were conducted over the course of the space station's construction period to connect different modules that had been built on different continents around the world and had never been integrated together until they all reached space. And since assembly was completed in 2011, a very productive research program has been implemented on the space station that has continuously grown and will continue to deliver unique results until the end of lifetime of ISS. Now, our human research program on board the ISS covers all body systems that are affected by the space environment. For example, with our research, we address the issue of aging. Astronauts on board the space station age much faster than people down on Earth, and that also study aging processes in a very structured way on healthy subjects. We study the muscle system of our crew members because astronauts work in a weightlessness environment. Very little muscle contraction is needed to move around. We all know that without regular use and regular exercise, muscles weaken and deteriorate, which we really have to counteract against. You probably have seen pictures from crew members returning from their missions on board the space station when they land in Kazakhstan. And you've probably noticed that they have to be carried to seats for the welcoming ceremony. And just imagine that one day we land on Moon or on Mars, not in a state that allows us to carry out the tasks that they were trained for. Food and nutrition are important parts of our lives. The primary role of food is to provide us with sufficient nutrients and energy to meet our metabolic requirements. But we know that those requirements are not met by astronauts when they are on board the space station. Their energy consumption is significantly below the requirements that are set forth, for example, by the World Health Organization. And we all know how an energy deficit can affect our mood, our ability to function properly. So we really need to understand this negative energy balance. Is it because astronauts have less taste or smell sensations in space? Is it because astronauts have reduced appetite? Is it because energy requirements of astronauts are simply altered when they're in space? Do they need less calories to begin with when they are on board the space? Does that mean that we need to send less food into space for such long duration exploration missions, which would allow us to save valuable cargo mass on board the spacecraft? So you see, we address a lot of interesting questions with our pool of experiments. But preparing for spaceflight is not an easy task. Sending people into space is expensive and dangerous. Access to the International Space Station is very important. There's huge competition amongst scientists to make use of the space station for their research. And that is why we have alternative research platforms in our portfolio. We make use of alternative ground-based analog platforms in which we simulate certain aspects of the space environment that are characteristic for such demanding missions. So we actually do not need to send astronauts to space in order to study how the human body reacts to the space environment. We can do space research on Earth without having to leave Earth. We can do research on the effects of the space environment on health and performance without actually having to go into space. And that is one of the very strong elements of our human research program. We can offer complementary space research platforms to our science community. Like, for example, the very popular parabolic flight platform, which is our scientific to the International Space Station. Since 1984, we have been organizing parabolic flight campaigns using 5 different aircrafts. More than 1,000 experiments were successfully conducted during more than 7,000 parabolas. That is an equivalent to about 60 hours of weightlessness or more than 20 low Earth orbits. We can use parabolic flights to test the effect of microgravity on fast adapting organ systems. Parabolic flights are therefore a very valuable tool for us to look into microgravity effects on, for example, the neurovestibular system, which is a system that reacts very, very fast to weightlessness. The main advantage about parabolic flights is that they allow us and scientists to study microgravity effects with and on humans without having to go through lengthy astronaut training to the International Space Station. And we also don't need to send them to the ISS. In addition, there is a relatively short turnaround time, so we can implement experiments relatively fast. There are relatively low costs involved. We provide actually the flight opportunity to scientists free of charge. And the scientists have the possibility to directly modify the experiment during and between parabolas. We make now use of a specially configured A310 aircraft. A little anecdote: that aircraft used to belong to was the former German government plane. So Chancellor Angela Merkel, she wanted to have a new one a few years back, and she put this one out for sale, and we bought it. So that plane has recently been certified for flying parabolas that, in addition to microgravity levels, also offer partial gravity levels. So we can now fly parabolas that correspond to lunar and to Martian gravity levels, and we will do so in a special campaign that will take place next week, actually. In addition, another of our ground-based research platforms are Bedrest studies. Bedrest studies are a very well-established model to study the effects of inactivity or disuse of muscles on volunteers. So the volunteers who participate to our Bedrest studies, they spend up to 60 days in bed, tilted towards the head end, usually about 6 degrees below the horizontal, and by doing so, the bodies of the volunteers start to adapt as if they were in space. So that allows us to mimic and to see some of the effects of space travel. Bedrest studies are therefore a very valuable tool for us, and we actually have a very long history of conducting Bedrest studies. But what do we actually gain from reproducing those effects? What is the point of making volunteers suffer? Well, we make use of those effects that Bedrest has on the volunteers to test promising countermeasures. We have tested a lot of different countermeasures in the past, ranging from very clever exercise devices that you can use while lying in bed. We've tested different drugs, special nutrition, but none of those countermeasures have provided us yet with the optimal solution to counteract the effects of weightlessness on the human body. So the hunt for the perfect countermeasure continues. Trivia number 1 for you guys. What do you think? What is the simplest way to counteract the effect of zero gravity on the human body? And those who work at ESA, please don't answer.
Physical exercise.
What else?
Food.
What else? We just take gravity with us. Of course, it is not that simple. But we do have tools to create gravity. We can create artificial gravity. Now, artificial gravity is perhaps the most promising, but paradoxically the least studied method to counter the physiological effect that microgravity has on the human body. Of course, artificial gravity cannot solve the critical issues that are associated with exposure to radiation, of being isolated and confined, but it has the potential to reproduce Earth-like gravity and therefore to reduce all those negative effects that microgravity has on the human body. And that is actually what we would like to do, or that we will do within our Bedrest program. So we will focus on artificial gravity as a countermeasure. We have centrifuges that we can use to investigate artificial gravity as a countermeasure. And with those centrifuges, we try to identify the most optimal protocol to be applied in future long-duration human exploration missions. Now, where else do we do research to prepare for such missions? We also do research on the Antarctic continent. The French-Italian Concordia station, which is located here, is one of only 3 research stations on the Antarctic continent that are permanently occupied throughout the entire year. The only other 2 research bases that are on the Antarctic inland and that are continuously manned are the American South Pole station Amundsen Scott and the Russian Vostok station here. 600 kilometers away to the north. which actually makes Concordia Station more remote than the International Space Station. Now you probably wonder why we are involved here. What makes Concordia Station such a fascinating place for space-related human research? Now, a stay on Concordia Station resembles a lot the conditions that astronauts will face when they are on long-duration exploration missions. Concordia Station shares many stressor characteristics with long-duration deep space missions. Crew members who stay there are extremely isolated and confined. They have to live autonomously, and as such, Concordia serves as a very useful analog platform for our research. And Concordia Station has actually been proposed as being one of the highest fidelity analogs on Earth for long-duration exploration missions. And that is why Concordia Station has been an important pillar of our research activities for more than a decade. So that is why we've been working together with the operators of Concordia Station to use results from research experiments to extrapolate for missions beyond low Earth orbit into deep space and to prepare for future long-duration missions with human crews. Now, did you know that cosmic radiation and its effects on the human body have been identified as being one of the main showstoppers for human exploration and colonization of the solar system? Up until now, radiation exposure during our human spaceflight activities were within the geomagnetic field, which is our natural protection against space radiation. So our exposure to space radiation has therefore up until now been relatively low, and no special actions were needed to stay within acceptable radiation limits. However, if we go into, if we embark on interplanetary missions, those limits are likely to exceed acceptable dose limits. That leads to an increased risk for late cancer, or may also lead to acute radiation sickness. Unfortunately, up until now, we do not yet have good countermeasures at hand or radiation protection strategies. That's why we have been making use of a couple of ground-based radiation facilities which we use within our EBER program to advance our knowledge in that field. So that is another platform that helps us to prepare for future human exploration missions without having to leave Earth. And then finally, we also support activities that do not fit into the box, that do not fit into our traditional research platforms, but which are nevertheless quite innovative, promising, and exploration relevant. Let me give you one example. When you think about the scariness and all the risks and challenges that the space environment has on us, then dust, and specifically moon dust, is probably not exactly on your radar screens. But it is much more dangerous than you probably realize. Because of the lack of gravity, dust never settles when you are in space. So imagine breathing all the dust in, with each breath 1 million tiny particles, and think about the damage it can do to your lungs. Dust is made out of tiny sharp grains. It can be as rough as sandpaper. And just think about the damage it can do to your lungs. It is a very fine powder that can find its way into basically everything. It sticks everything, including, for example, your spacesuit. And the crew of Apollo 17, which is pictured here, they learned their lesson on of how dangerous moon dust can be. During the mission back in 1972, after their moonwalk, they were so eager to return back to the lunar lander that they forgot to dust off their spacesuits and their moon boots before re-entering the spacecraft. And the dust then clogged up everything. It spread all over the spacecraft, and they were then stuck with it on their entire journey home. And all crew members soon complained of nasal congestion, which is a phenomenon that we now call lunar hay fever. So the topic of lunar dust, or dust in general, is something where a very bright team of scientists is currently trying to develop models and strategies on how to mitigate the toxic effects of dust in space. Now that concludes my very brief overview on our human research activities. I could talk endlessly and in more detail about our various projects and activities, but I don't want to overload you too much. Allow me just one final remark before you go on with your trivia. We are very often confronted with the question whether or not it is justified to spend valuable taxpayers' money on something that is out of this world. Should we not better spend that money on earthly, more terrestrial issues to improve life on Earth? Well, let me tell you one thing. There are very clear parallels between the effects of spaceflight and terrestrial issues. Space research has been contributing to improving health on Earth. Medical care, for example, has become more accessible in remote or underdeveloped regions by use of small handheld ultrasound units which can be operated from remotely, thereby making access to healthcare more, or to the healthcare system more efficient. And those techniques were actually pioneered for use on board the space station. The investigation of metallic alloys on board the space station has contributed to the development of new materials that are now used in the new A320neo. And with that new material, the turbine blades are not only significantly lighter, but they also show much better properties in terms of strength and heat resistance, and they're less corrosive, allowing jet engines to be quieter, more fuel efficient, and also eco-friendly. So there are a lot of applications that stem from space research that have led to societal and economic benefits, and I'm convinced that many more will follow, because we have just now begun to make full use of all platforms and opportunities that are out there. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, for providing me with the opportunity to present our human research program to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.